welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with Michelle and my special guest today. Roko's not able to join us, but Jim Rembach. Jim, and I'm going to read this, is the president of Call Center Coach, which is a virtual learning community for leaders in call center environments. And Dee Kohler is the one that introduced me to Jim Rembach, and Dee considers Jim to be her brother, as Dee considers me to be her sister. So basically, Jim and I are step siblings to Dee Kohler. So this week's quote that we're going to kick off in the leadership lesson series is extraordinary doesn't come from magic. It comes from a magician. So Jim found this quote, and we couldn't figure out who to attribute it to. But what I loved about it is it made me pause and think for a minute, because I thought, okay, if that's true, then what does it take to be a musician? And for me, I mean, a magician rather. Of course, it's the same thing to be a musician, okay? Is dedication, some sort of skill set and practice, and some commitment to intentionally being better at whatever this thing is that you're doing. And so when I think about that, I think about just being a leader and how that is so true. So I appreciate the quote. And there's another one along those lines that we'll might introduce later. And so, Jim, thank you and welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Michelle. Thanks for allowing me to be here with you.
So when you look back at your leadership journey, and I know the leadership journey that you've helped, because you also have a podcast, and a couple of them, I think, that you've had for more than a minute. What stands out for you in your leadership journey as far as pivotal moments for you? Maybe looking back that it's like, at the time didn't seem that significant. When you look back, you know what, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
Well, to me, there's so many different pivotal moments that occur throughout our life. I think the most important thing is not to dwell upon them as, situations that it should carry any type of regret and heavy burden, as well as anything that would be associated with erosion of your self-esteem. Because for me, it took time for me to start figuring out, and I would say this is where, to me, an explanation of the midlife crisis kind of came into play, until I hit my, 35, 40, 45 time frame to start, really, kind of understanding, how I tick and why I tick the way I do, and being okay with the way that I tick. I just actually texted with somebody earlier today who was asking me some questions about doing something. Well, I can just say right what it is. Yeah. I'm actually a baseball pitching coach.
Okay.
And I actually coach for a local high school, public high school. And I actually have gone through a couple different certification processes and even became a performance coach, to help these kids to be successful at pitching. I have always been someone who is looking for breaking the status quo, right? Hey, we need to look and see how to do this better and strive to be able to do that, because while the effort to change, the effort to, go through, the work, is tough, the outcome is better, because we know we have proof. We have elite level performers that are doing these types of things. And so the head coach was asking me some questions about some winter workouts for some pitchers, and he was only going to give me 1 day a week. And I'm like, what do you, 1 day a week? I said, I need at least 2. I'm working on motor movement activities, and that requires repetitive, of work. And he replies back and said something about me being a pain in his butt. And I said, us innovators are totally fine with that description. Where in my youth, I would have probably jumped back on him and tried to defend myself. But I'm like, yeah, I am an innovator. I am a disruptor. I am a pot stirrer. And that is who I am. And have I lost jobs, because of being the one who can't stop stirring the pot? Yeah. And that was tough. When you're told essentially you're not good enough for being you.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? So I think, again, going back and dwelling and saying, well, I'm bad because I always look for ways to improve things. I shouldn't be doing that. Now, my key is from a behavior and influence perspective is how do I get better
Mm-hmm.
at my thoughts and ideas melding and collaborating, and then therefore being something that is charged and badged and bought into. That's really the differentiating factor. And in my youth, just the passion would take over.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we need to do, and that just doesn't work. Right. It just doesn't
You're
work.
so funny. You're talking, and my brain's going to the finesse that you would use now versus the approach that was before, right? So you still have the passion, the energy, everything behind it, but it's all of a sudden it's like, okay, so the path of least resistance is not straight ahead,
That's
right?
unfortunate.
You at least know there's some relationships, there's some, why. I mean, around that, right? Someone comes back and says, you got one day, and you're like, screw you, I'm not even going to be here. Versus you have to understand, I need 2 days for XYZ. This is the impact of not having the 2 days. And so when I think about that, I think about the finesse and the approach that you do, that you literally don't have the skill set to be a magician, right? When you're younger.
That's true. And it's much like, even if you look at it in the field of athletics, everybody has a different type of starting point, meaning that,
Mhm.
okay, because of my upbringing and my genetics and my influences and all of these other things, I may be at a better starting point. But ultimately, we also have to deal with the development of our prefrontal cortex and our executive functioning, and there's those factors. So there's a lot of things that go into, how come I can't perform in the way that I want to perform? And with time, if we're open and curious and reflective and have people who could give us good guidance and feedback, we'll realize that success is all whatever success we have in our life comes through and with other people.
Mhm.
And so when we start talking about leadership is actually practice. Much like if you think about a lawyer practices law.
Mhm.
Doctor practices medicine. And here's
Mhm.
the funny thing that people oftentimes don't stop and think about is, do you think lawyers are their own lawyers? No, no, no. They have their own counsel.
Mhm.
No better. Do you think doctors doctor themselves? No,
Mhm.
because they know better.
Yeah.
And so when you think about leadership, I, pra- I have to practice leadership. It's about behavior change. It's about awareness. It's about
Mhm.
flexibility and agility. It's about, you know, being able to influence and persuade and connect and have community. And that just doesn't happen by watching a freaking video or reading a book.
Mm-mm.
And the unfortunate reality, I like to I like to jokingly say, if you start looking at the dollars that are spent in leadership development, across the globe, the fact is that 90% of all investments in it are at the 10% of an organization.
Oh
So
yeah.
they invest at the very, very top. And then unfortunately, we think that there's going to be what I call a Reaganomics effect, meaning that, hey, we'll train and spend all this money up here and then it'll trickle all the way down to the front line. That never happens.
Mm-mm.
And when you look at the statistics associated with especially frontline leaders who I deal with a lot in a call center contact center environment, a call center coach, and then the managers that we report to, and
Mhm.
sometimes the directors, is that those frontline supervisors who essentially are leading a much larger group
Mhm.
in the organization than any other leader
Yep.
oftentimes don't get any type of leadership development, even if it's the cheap, foolish video thing. 6 years, it's like 6 years after they've actually received the role or been put in the role.
Mhm.
6 years.
Well, not only that, I look at it. I was with one of the organizations I was with a long time, and I finally got into in talent management L&D part of the org. And literally, what you're talking about is when people hit director level, okay, and above is where the resources are spent. And I was like, to your point, you may have 3 or 4 direct reports, maybe at that point. When you had, and especially in healthcare, where you had 80 people reporting to you, you weren't developed. We're not going to spend money. So it's like I look for an organization, if you're going to get the most ROI for your money, start investing it where people are having the most touch points with people in your organization. Yes, you still need to continue to develop up, but what happens is if you wait, right, until that magic time where someone hits director level, you've got a lot of less than ideal habits to unwind to start creating a way to engage with people differently. And I just think if we start, to your point, we don't have to unwind all this stuff.
Well, and look at the finance of it as well. I mean, if you start talking about these frontline people, where's most of your churn occurring? So these people are
Exactly.
burning through people left and right because they
Yes,
don't know how to actually retain them.
exactly.
And so now
Yeah.
it's, we can't find good people. Wrong answer, right? That's not the issue. The issue is we haven't properly developed our people.
Mhm.
That's the issue.
Yep.
And
Well, and
so,
call centers got a higher turnover rate than like most industries that I've been. I'm like, I was shocked when I discovered, because I hadn't been around call center before, but I was shocked to discover what it was. I'm like, holy cow.
well, so here's the thing too, though, is to take into consideration, and this is happening in a lot of types of lots of industries, is that business automation and artificial intelligence have at this moment caused a retraction in the amount of call center seats worldwide. So call
Mhm.
centers are have shrunk in number of employees.
Right.
However, think about what they're actually dealing with and interacting with now. It's more complex than it was before,
Mhm.
right? Because all the simple stuff's being taken care of through automation,
Exactly.
right? So what does that also mean? That means my depth of skill and knowledge is getting deeper, and
Mhm.
I need to retain those people.
Well,
The
because the cost to replace them is even more expensive.
even more expensive,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah.
And also, if you look at the research, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Jim Harder, who is the chief scientist of workplace for Gallup organization.
Okay.
And he wrote a book um, that was titled "It's the Manager."
Mm.
And he said, in 80 years worth of research of the workplace by Gallup organization, 80 years, he goes, as much as 80% of the reason why people leave organizations is because of the relationship they have with their direct manager. The relationship.
Mhm.
So if you look at who could actually improve your loyalty, improve performance, improve morale, it's the skills and abilities of that person who is being reported to, right?
Mhm.
And again, you look at these levels of the organization, it ain't going to trickle down. I mean, we're
Mm-mm.
talking about changing behaviors, becoming more aware of my impact. And again, you practice leadership. The sooner you
Mhm.
start in practice at leadership, the better off you're going to be and the stronger your organization is going to be.
Mhm.
Financial impact will come with it.
I don't disagree with you. It's interesting, one of the things that you said around that, around where organizations spend their money, and I experience the same thing. And the expectation is that, you're going to develop your people, and then you're going to develop your people, and you're going to develop your people. It's nice in theory. Here's I think the biggest drawback to that, because you can have a bunch of well-intentioned leaders that want to go back and air quote take this back to their teams. But if I've only been in a classroom for a certain period of time and I'm just practicing myself or deciding whether or not I'm going to, how successful do you think I'm going to be at developing the people that report to me? So I've seen it work in very limited circumstances, but these were with leaders that were so focused and committed on developing themselves that they were literally practicing alongside their teams. And that's not the norm.
That is not the norm, and you bring up a really interesting point. So when we first launched the call center coach, and so it's a blended learning academy, we have a community, we have certification, we have, a short, quick courses and videos. We have all kinds of resources because of the different learning modes
Yeah.
and we need different modalities. Is we started seeing people with titles of vice president, and director, and we were typically looking at that frontline supervisor and developing
Yeah.
their, and then also people who potentially could be good supervisors, because typically in the call center, what happens is
Right.
we put people in that seat because they were a good agent. The
Yeah.
competencies are quite different.
Yeah.
But anyway, I started asking these senior level leaders, I'm like, why, why did you enroll in call center coach? And I got three answers.
Mm.
And they all made total sense once I uncovered them. The first one was, I've never been responsible from the call center, and then now I'm responsible for this thing, and I need to build
Oh.
skills. That happens all the time. Another one was, it's been a long time since I've been on the front line, and I need to update my skills
Mm-hmm.
on what I should be current on. And then the third thing that I heard was, well, if I'm supposed to set expectations and I'm supposed to be coaching these people in regards to performance with the organization, I need to know what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
All fantastic answers,
Yeah.
but unique. Unique in the fact that that isn't a universal type of response and something that would happen. They've dedicated themselves to those things.
Well, I was going to say it's a type of response that comes from leaders who are committed to being great leaders.
Right.
Those are those responses. So they realize, okay, fine, in order for me to do this, I think of IO mapping, right? Intermediate objectives mapping. If this is the condition I want to bring to existence, basically, I'm going to be successful in my role and my people are going to be successful. What has to be true? And those three answers are under that. This needs to be true, along with some other stuff, right? I need to be able to set expectations. I need to know what my teams are going through. And I actually need to know that at some level, their job, not the to do it, but to understand what they're up against. It's interesting to me, the leadership journey that we go through, the stuff that you were talking about originally around, being a coach, that you're an innovator, a disruptor, all that stuff. The evolution you went through and your approach to connecting with people and how you are, and the fact that you're still you, but you're not beating yourself up over being you. And I think that's all part of when I think about coaching, because anyway, let me finish this thought because my brain's going 50 different directions. When I hear that, and when I think about what we do as far as lessons in leadership, a lot of it too, I think, is about giving ourselves grace for where we are in our journey, whatever point that may be. Because at any point in it, I mean, I had people before tell me, Michele, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And this was back in the early parts of my journey. And I, at the time, couldn't wrap my brain around what that meant. But what I finally got feedback later on is it's the energy that I showed up with on what I was saying, the passion behind it, the whatever, which could either engage people or it could shut them down,
Right.
depending on who I was engaging with, right? So when I think about that, I think about what needed to be true for me to be open to showing up differently, to going through that stuff. Grace is the thing that I needed to give myself and not beat myself up and go, okay, that's just how I am. I'm not get any better. That's just me.
But I would add on to what you're saying. It's also coming to the realization and the conclusion that you need to avoid putting yourself in certain situations. So as I had mentioned, I always like to look for ways to improve. So I'm a fixer, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a creative fixer. So that's yet even another problem. And I'm left-handed. So I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, you
I
always
got a lot going on. Yeah.
I got a lot of craziness happening here.
Yeah.
Um, so if I start thinking about things that frustrate me to no end, because then throw in the impatience with it. It's like, no, I
Mhm.
want to wait 5 years to fix this out, to fix this thing. Is I can't be stuck in very legacy and institutional types of systems
Mm.
where there's a lot of bureaucracy. We have to have a committee to create a 3-hump camel, which does no one no good. I mean, it's like, okay, I just need to avoid that, because a long time ago, somebody talked about our energy units, and that we only have so many energy units a day. To me, this made so much sense.
Mhm.
And so, for example, just say 20 energy units. Right?
Okay.
And so when things come easy to us, and essentially we're in the zone, we're in the groove,
Yeah.
we don't burn many energy units. And if you think about it, this is our human being, it's the same thing. We're going for preservation and procreation, right? So
Yes.
and so as far as preservation goes, I don't want to burn a lot of my energy units.
Mhm.
Now, if I'm doing things that just are difficult for me, I burn more energy units.
Yeah.
If I'm forced to do things that are, in that uncomfortable situation, I burn even more energy units. So when we start talking about burnout,
Yeah.
people are stuck in burnout because they're in situations by which can't get in the flow.
Hmm.
They haven't realized that, you know what, this just isn't the type of environment that I should be in. All of these types of things that we're burning energy units and don't even realize it. So for me, I've tried to learn how to be more conservative with burning my energy units. So it's like, okay, very, very difficult people that don't want to change and it's part of it.
Hmm.
I just need to avoid it.
Hmm.
I just don't put myself in that spot.
Hmm.
Or if I am, I better need to make sure that I am well prepared for that
Yeah.
and that I have a fully charged stack of energy
Yeah.
units. Because
Yeah.
I can get through it if I am, fully charged. But if
Yeah.
I'm depleted, it's not gonna turn out well.
I love the analogy. It reminded me of you made up your 20 energy units, and there was another one around it's like comparing our brain function and what we go through to like a cell phone battery. And then the other one was basically you start off a full day, right? Fully charged, if you will. You've got 10 pennies. And you can literally do this activity at your desk or wherever you're at and start off with your 10 pennies. And then pay attention to where things happen during your day that deplete your pennies, right? And actually move your pennies away to where you don't have any more and move it from your left pocket to your right pocket or whatever that may be. Because I think what you're talking about, Jim, is that when we're younger, we don't necessarily are aware, okay, that it's happening. We just know that we're pissed off, irritated, whatever it may be, and other things we're like on cloud nine, we're clicking along, but we don't necessarily connect the little nuances of things that could be happening. And so some kind of awareness to what's impacting you. And it could be, to your point, the people you engage with. Think about meetings that you're going to. You're like, oh man, Johnny's going to be there. Johnny's always a downer. Johnny's always, oh, okay. Do you have to go to the meeting with Johnny? Is there someone else that can go to the meeting with Johnny? But it's being aware of those things that literally zap your energy, because when you get to that point, it's not just this joking around or analogy about I've got to recharge myself, but we literally can't critically think or creatively think when we're at that, hey, we've run out. You don't have any pennies left, or you're down to like nothing. It's like running your cell phone when you're at 2%.
Well, and let's add on to this is that if you think about resilience, right?
Hmm.
That's a skill.
Yes,
And I mean, think about this. I mean, we're born totally helpless. We need to be taken care of for everything.
we can scream when we need something. That's our skill.
Well, and unfortunately, many adults or many, kids turn into young adults and then adults and they still do the screaming. Uh,
Yes.
that's not going to get you anywhere.
No.
What we have to be able to do is to build our resiliency skills. So much like I was talking about, getting better at not allowing certain things to burn as many energy units. Yes,
Hmm.
I'm getting good at that. Right. I've learned, learning how to be a little bit more resilient, learning how to go left, to be able to pivot around something just to come back on course later on.
Hmm.
That's skill, that's a skill building and awareness thing. So if I start looking at resilience, our younger generation is not being developed in the skills of resilience. And matter of fact, if you start looking at, hey, I deal with, issues and conflict, how I find them on social media, we
Wow.
have problems, right?
Hmm.
We can just look all throughout the world and all these conflicts, how we have multiple generations that have been brought up and through and into divisiveness,
Hmm.
and shoot, before share. It's
Hmm.
like, and unfortunately, that's, one of those things when you start thinking about leadership and leadership development, you have to be resilient.
Hmm.
Also too, if you're an innovator, you're going to be called a pain in the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be resilient and say, you know what? I'm good with that because I know we're going to be better in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And, being called whatever in the short term, being fired in the short term,
Mm-hmm.
that sucks. But
It does.
tomorrow will be a better day if I choose for it to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's I told my kids while they were growing up, and I hear them saying it to others, is it's about choices. And the whole idea with, is the glass half empty or half full? Am I filtering through a positive mindset or a negative mindset? What am I filtering through? Those are about choices and being able to develop the capability to where you're filtering through one over the other, right? And it's not Pollyanna that, hey, everything's sunshine and everything else. It's a different lens that you're filtering through. So your brain is not looking for negative, 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 right? To where I'm below the line, everything's being done to me. I have no control over what's happening in my world. So I think a lot of that is that skill, all the stuff you're talking about around resilience, is developing that skill that we can change the narrative that maybe somebody else is pumping into our head in that moment. So it's not the doom and gloom, they're coming after us, type of thing. And you're absolutely right. We have 100% control over that if we develop the skills to manage the jargon.
We also have to be aware that we have a school system that teaches nothing but negativity.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the whole grading scenario, when you look at, I have to be in AP classes, I have to,
Mhm.
get certain things on standardized tests, I have to get into the school that I mean, all of those types of things. Um, all of that negativity kind of makes it difficult for us to realize some of the things that you're talking about. Focus in on the positive. I say, what do you?
Mhm.
I had 14 years of conditioning of beating myself up and thinking that I needed to do more.
I agree. I don't disagree with you. And I think it's like, when I think about it, as leadership starts with leading ourselves first, and part of leadership, if you don't have direct reports and you're a parent, that's another aspect of leadership, right? So I don't disagree with anything that you said on that stuff. And I think there is the responsibility around choices as a leader of yourself, a leader of your kids, a leader of people through the org structure that report to you, that are in the care and feeding of you, to figure out what does a little bit better look like in the development of myself and service to developing others. So yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about 1% better every day, right?
Yeah,
Just
there you
just
go.
get better every day. And here's the funny thing
Yes.
too, when we start looking at, and you mentioned something about the investment and where that happens within organizations in regards to leadership development,
Yes.
is that, and this is again where some of that, maybe that midlife crisis or mid-career crisis comes into play, is that if you look at an organizational chart, um, people, because of their technical skills and abilities, can
Mm-hmm.
excel and move up within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
However, once you get to a certain level of an organization, that technical skill becomes a good thing to have, but 80%, it flips. 80% of your need and skills and abilities is actually in people.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is, go back to that scenario that you talked about. We have certain people that get up to a peak level of performance with their technical skill, and then everybody looks at them and says, man, you're a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know what? We need to give them training.
Yeah. Well, it's
Or they
funny.
terminate them, or
Yeah.
they terminate them. And then that person
Um,
gets on a job.
we had another leader that I used to work with and stuff, and she commented on that as her one-on-ones, because she's an executive or operations executive now, is the people that report to her are directors. And she said their one-on-ones are not focused on what are your performance metrics, what's your P&L doing. It's about what are you doing to develop your people. So she realizes the importance of that in cascading down, but there has to be an expectation set for that to be happening. And I see it happening in pockets.
Mm.
And it is highly leader dependent. Again, back to choices, right? Of developing self to develop others in service of. fill in the blank. Yeah. Jim, I appreciate this time like tremendously. And I will reach out to Dee again and thank her for the introduction to you. And I want to stay connected. What are, as we wrap up, what are one or two things, some people are chattier and have to have two, that you want people to walk away with around this subject that we've been talking about?
I think, like we were talking about a second ago, is that lawyers practice law, doctors practice medicine, leaders need to practice leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey, and everybody has different starting points. Everybody has different tools in their toolbox and toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, learn about the differences between competencies and skills. They're
Mm-hmm.
two different things. I mean, a competency is actually what you build your skills upon.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, a call center coach, when we start talking about those frontline leaders and moving up into a manager role, 25, 30 years of research looking at successful people. What are the competencies that they need to build? And what we found was staff development, results orientation, customer service and sales, collaborative relationships, communication and change management, and business acumen. And the interesting thing is, those competencies are needed at every single level of the
Yeah, that's what I
organization.
was going to say as you said them. And I'm like, okay, so who doesn't need that?
Exactly. So start building them now,
Yeah.
right? Build them early. It takes a long time. You know, be open, be curious, and have the most important attribute. And this is, to me, I think, a tipping point for a lot of people. There's
Yeah.
one attribute that is by far the most important attribute that you need to have as a person when it comes to being a leader and accepting the role and responsibility. And that is, you need to have the feeling and the desire and the wish to develop somebody I mean, well, I should say, even if that means that they're going to exceed you in rank and responsibility,
Oh, yeah.
that shouldn't matter,
Yeah.
right? You should
Yeah.
be committed to helping other people be successful.
Yeah. It's the, it's funny you say that with passion, and it took me back to where, for me, one of the key measurements of success is when people on my team got promoted out and went beyond. And it was like a proud mama moment, when your birds fly and they're off and running. But I agree, and it's the servant leader and service to others um mindset. So yeah, I totally agree with you. The thing that I'll piggyback on with what, oh, go ahead.
Well, I'll throw one other one out there because you said a word, and for me, this is also a little controversial.
Oh, that's so great.
But I I had some learnings and started thinking about that whole giving nature and servant leadership and all of that. And again, talking about our conditioning and what we're brought up with.
Yes.
We often say, "Oh, I'm so proud of you." I don't say that anymore. I don't say it to my pitchers. I don't say it to my kids. Because if I say I'm proud, well, that's about me.
Oh.
And the fact is, I should be happy for them. They
Mm-hmm.
carried the load. They did the work. They, came out on the better end of it, or they struggled and learned. But the
Yeah.
fact is that they're the ones doing it. It's not me. If I can help them, that's fantastic. But I don't say that, I'm proud of any. I need to learn how to be more proud of myself and the things that I've accomplished. And that's what I tell my kids and my pitchers all the time. I'm like, look, you had this performance. You should be proud of
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Help them to build their self-esteem.
Yeah. It's an interesting nuance. I hadn't thought of it. Hadn't thought of it.
It's
Because when
just
you
so
were saying it, my brain went to what the frick would you tell him then? Because pride is, because you feel this sense of pride. But I love the idea of letting people know, and you're also breaking down this thing of you can't be boastful, or you can't have this pride of accomplishment or what you've just done, because there's arrogance or whatever, which is not the same.
Not at all. Not at
So
all.
yeah, no,
It's
I
one of those.
like that.
I know it's a little off-centered and strange, but to me, it just stuck with me. And I was like, you know what? It ain't about me.
Yeah,
Of course, I have to tell my
Well,
teenagers that all the time.
now I'm
What
not,
about you?
yeah, yeah, do not, they're not going to believe you. Thing for me when you were talking is something that you said back in the very beginning when you're talking about lawyers. Lawyers don't treat themselves or counsel themselves. Doctors don't treat themselves. So as a leader, who is your person you're going to get feedback from, whatever that may look like? And it can be a peer buddy, it can be anyone else. But I think part of it too, what you're talking about is in the practice of getting better at leadership, who are you going to get feedback from? Who's going to check in and hold the mirror up for you and to say, hey, here's what a little bit better looks like. And yes, you are doing it. So I think that's the thing for me is who's your sidekick? Who's the person that you're going to for those things as you practice?
Oh, those relationships are extremely hard to find.
Yeah.
But and sometimes for some people, they're like, I don't want it to be anybody that I know. Right.
Oh,
Because like, for example, I mean, is your mama going to give you criticism? And at some point she may give you some, but she's going to protect you. Right. And a lot of your close friends will protect you,
yeah.
hurt your feelings. They don't.
Yeah.
And also too, we're assuming that they have the skills and abilities to do it.
I
Uh,
was going to say that's probably it more than anything else.
that's the other issue. So
Yeah.
they say that the joke is that I don't know, it's a joke, but they say that the loneliest position within an organization is at the very top. And everybody's like,
Yeah.
well, they've got all these advisors. Yeah, but because of that whole, bias of, that
Yeah.
hierarchy level in the position, they don't get pressed and pushed by other
No,
people, right?
no.
They didn't hire me because I would have never cared.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the point being is that they call it a very lonely position.
Yeah.
And so the fact is that when you start looking at throughout an organization, positions of authority have that same problem. And so
Mhm.
you need to have a peer community that you're engaged with on a
Mhm.
regular basis, and then try to get those types of relationships with people who didn't grow up with you, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they can do it.
Well, and realize it doesn't have, when you say community, and people may be thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know a large group of people. Your community could just be you and your buddies at work. I mean, who is around you? Who can give you feedback from a meeting or, virtual or in person, whatever that looks like. So who's there that can actually be a sounding board for you and give you feedback on whether or not you're getting a little bit better at practicing those things that you're working on. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Jim,
you're gonna have to build that relationship. You're going to
yes,
have to invest and build that type of relationship. They just don't
agreed.
happen
Yeah. Yeah.
by asking or saying, "Hey, could you give me some feedback?" That's
Yeah.
not that's not the way it works.
Yeah, no, it's not an accidental thing. I
No.
completely agree. It's an intentional thing. People have to know what feedback to give you. Because some people will go right into problem solving of what you've done, whatever. Yeah. So there needs to be some level of skill in that as well. And it can be people that are on the same learning journey as you. It doesn't have to be crazy, expensive coach or whatever that is. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and it doesn't have to be like, well, I need the person up above me or two levels
No,
above me to mentor
no,
me. That's not always the case either.
no. That to me is an and.
Mm.
You can do peer buddies, everything else, and then let your boss know what you're working on. Let them know that you're intentionally developing around XYZ, whatever that may be. And then they've got awareness too to be able to give you feedback, but they're not the ones that have to give it to you. Because you've got peers in the room with you a lot more often. And if you're really vulnerable and strong and courageous, if you got direct reports, let them know what you're working on. So it's everywhere. And I think the more feedback we get, the more quickly the skills and the changes that we're trying to make will actually take place.
Yeah, and I'll give you one quick opener in order to
Yeah.
maybe have that type of conversation with somebody. And going back to you talking about people who've influenced me and mentored me, Dr. Robert Cialdini, who is recognized as the godfather of the science of persuasion, said, "We always get it wrong when you start thinking about liking. Even when we were little, it's like you want people to like you." And he said,
Yeah.
that's not really how it works. He goes, people like you when they know you like them.
Mm,
That's when it happens. That's when the magic happens. Talking about being a magician. Magic happens when people know you like them. And so even those people that just seem to just irritate the living end out of you, right? You have to find something that you actually find that you admire about them, which could be the intuitiveness, right? They're relentless. That could be, but you have to find that. And if you want to, and because even getting feedback from those type of people are important. You don't want somebody who's exactly like you. What kind of feedback do you think you're going to get? You're going to get average feedback. It's what you would give yourself. You have to find what is referred to in positive psychology as an unlikely pair. Find that unlikely pair, that person who's just like, and tell them, hey, you know what? I really like the way that you're critical about something. Could you help?
Yeah. Well, I admire. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Thank you. Enjoyed this time. You and I do not have a problem finding stuff to talk about. And I could listen to the depth of your experience and your perspective for a long time. So thank you. This has been Leadership Soundbites with Michele and Jim Rembach. And so until next time, please like, share, subscribe. Thank you.